Hello and welcome to my channel, and the subject of this video is Goth albums 1980 to 1984, my favourite 10. Although Goth has been around for a long time now, the period 1980 to 1984 was the one where the genre was in its infancy and arguably at its most inventive. It was the period that established its defining characteristics: a poetic sense of melancholy or tragedy, dark romanticism, Victorian Gothic horror or biblical imagery. Musically, it could be quite varied. Some artists used tribal drumming a lot, others didn't. Either lead guitar or bass could be the melodic driving force. Minor chords were also a common feature, which helped create a tone of sadness. When it comes to the albums I've chosen, a couple of the artists concerned have subsequently become regarded as something other than goth. However, I bought all of the albums at or around the time of their release, and at that point they were pretty much regarded as being under the same umbrella. Whether my favourites coincide with anyone else's, who knows? There are a couple of notable omissions, which I will explain. Joy Division and Killing Joke I've excluded, not because of the music, but rather their aesthetic and presentation didn't really link in with most of the characteristics I've referred to. Having cleared that up, I'll get on with it. In 10th, it's Westworld by the Theatre of Hate from 1982. Their debut studio album produced by Mick Jones of The Clash. Even if, on the whole, it doesn't live up to the promise of the singles leading up to the album, it's still got a lot of positives. The opening track, Do You Believe in the Westworld, was released as a single and got to number 40 in the UK chart, which led to an appearance on Top of the Pops introduced by John Peel. Heavy on the tribal drumming and spaghetti western-style guitar, it's a fine start to the album. Judgment Hymn, 63, Love is a Ghost, and The Wake ensure that the first side remains solid. Side 2 does drift a little though. Conquistador is a decent enough start, but the version of it in A New Trail for Tears seems a little like filler. Freaks makes its point, but is a touch clumsy, and Anniversary verges on being anonymous. The Clan, however, is loaded with American Gothic imagery and ends the album in dramatic fashion. Theatre of Hate were excellent live, and I went to see them in Brighton on the tour promoting the album, where they were supported by UK Decay. A damn good pairing. Maybe if A New Trail of Tears had been swapped out for a track like Propaganda, I probably would have had this album higher in my list. 9th is Acid Bath by Alien Sex Fiend from 1984. Every genre requires at least one artist who doesn't take themselves too seriously. Alien Sex Fiend fit that role perfectly. I first heard them with the track R.I.P. on the Young Limbs Numb Hymns Batcave compilation album. Along with Test Department, I thought they were way more interesting than the rest of the artists. Acid Bath was their second album, following Who's Been Sleeping in My Brain, which I found underwhelming, to be honest. On Acid Bath, the tracks sound like more time was spent writing them and getting them prepared for recording. Guitar-wise, it's a fair bit heavier than their debut. Dead and Reburied, Hee Haw, Here Come the Bone People, and Attack No. 2 provide firm evidence of that. Mrs. Fiend's keyboards are given more prominence on She's a Killer and Break Down and Cry, Lay Down and Die, Goodbye. The same applies to EST Trip to the Moon, where the combination of drumming and electronic rhythms works really well. Singer Nick Fiend's often mad lyrics and delivery make sure an element of absurd humour is present in every track. Alien Sex Fiend were too comical for some goths perhaps, but I thought they were fun. 8th is For Madmen Only by UK Decay from 1981. Their only studio album, and it's one that unfortunately doesn't get a great deal of attention. However, all 12 tracks have something going for them, and the way they are ordered helps maintain a momentum that makes the album seem a lot shorter than just under 41 minutes. With the guitar, there's jaggedness, controlled fuzz, or harmonics used a fair bit, and the bass bass and drums provide a solid pulse. The imagery in the lyrics covers all the bases for what you'd want from a goth album. Battle of the elements, duel and shattered draw upon Old Testament type punishment and Catholicism. Horror is touched upon in Last in the House of Flames, Dorian and Unexpected Guest. The version of Unexpected Guest here is a reworking of an earlier single by the band, and it's an improvement on the looser feel of the single. Cold War geopolitics are referenced in Mayday Melody and the title track. Those two almost go into anarcho-punk territory. As I suggested, this album is an outlier in goth, but an essential one from the period. Seventh is the Black Album by The Damned from 1980. In Dave Vanian, The Damned had someone whose presentation fit the goth mould long before the genre was recognised as existing. Prior to the Black Album, though, The Damned's music was more rooted in standard late 70s UK punk rock. That's not to say they abandoned it on the Black Album, because there are tracks that could easily have fit on their previous album, Machine Gun Etiquette, such as Hit or Miss, Drinking About My Baby, and Sick of This and That. Despite that, it was clear the band was stretching out in new directions. Partly there's a 60s influence coming through, especially on Lively Arts and Silly Kids games. But it's the path they were taking on much of the rest of the album that brings the Black Album within the scope of goth. 13th Floor Vendetta, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Curtain Call in particular. Curtain Call, a 17-minute plus epic which took up the whole of the third side of the original vinyl release, is about as far as you could get from the 70s punk approach. It's a classic, memorable goth track and one of my absolute favourites of the genre. In sixth, it's Faith by The Cure from 1981. 17 Seconds had a darker mood than Three Imaginary Boys, and with Faith, things get darker still. Most of the album is pretty sombre with very minimal arrangements, but if you want an album with tragic beauty, then Faith is one to go for. The album's opening bass line on the Holy Hour sets a tone of despair. Next track, Primary, is one of two up-tempo ones, the other being Doubt on the second side. To some extent, they're as close as you get to earlier Cure, but in both cases, the only shift in mood is that the vocals are more frantic and urgent. After that, Other Voices returns to a slower pace. If anything, Robert Smith's vocals become even more despairing than on the Holy Hour. The almost sublimely morose All Cats Are Grey finishes side one. The Funeral Party starts side two in a similar vein, yet weirdly, when it comes to melody, it's probably Faith's brightest moment, relatively speaking. The Drowning Man and the title track conclude the album and are heavily claustrophobic. There's hardly anything uplifting about Faith except that if I happen to play it when I'm not in the best of moods, I find it quite cathartic. Now a brief interlude to look at what's coming in future videos. In fifth, it's Camouflage Heart by Cindy Talk from 1984. If UK Decays for Madmen Only is an outlier, then Camouflage Heart by Cindy Talk is way off in another dimension when it comes to recognition. After the release of this album, Cindy Talk's lead vocalist Gordon Sharp featured on 3 tracks for This Mortal Coil's highly regarded debut album, It'll End in Tears. So in retrospect, it's surprising that it didn't lead to more people listening to Camouflage Heart. The fact that I got to buy it was largely on account of hearing the industrial-sounding track Everybody Is Christ on John Peel's show. To my surprise, it turned out to be more of a goth album than an industrial one. Even so, it has an intensity greater than any goth I'd heard before. The drums are often played in a minimal fashion, a bit like what could be heard a few years later on the album Wings of Joy by Cranes. The bass gets heavily fuzzed. If you've listened to Double Dare by Bauhaus on their debut in the Flat Field, imagine the bass on that but ramped up a notch. The guitars bring an apocalyptic dread at times, and Gordon Sharp's vocals are brilliant in terms of power, drama, and range. Yet for all that, there are delicate moments too, where sparse piano notes evoke a sense of isolation. And like I suggested, there are industrial sounding parts too. A superb album that, for whatever reason, has disappeared between the cracks. Fourth is Juju by Susie and the Banshees from 1981. Although I've not put this as my favourite goth album, if I were to choose one which embodied the genre, this would be it. Spellbound, Into the Light, Arabian Nights, Halloween, Monitor, Night Shift, Sin in My Heart, Headcut and Voodoo Dolly are all excellent tracks. There's no padding, no filler, and not a second is wasted. So why don't I have this higher in my list? It's a rare thing, but this album is probably too even, and I like every track just about the same. Consequently, nothing leaps out particularly other than the experience of listening to the album as a whole. Whilst Juju doesn't have the sonic variety of Kaleidoscope, its consistency gives the impression that the band's line-up of Susie Sue, Steve Severin, Budgie and John McGeoch had developed into a strong songwriting and performing unit, and among the most innovative bands of their generation, which was quite an achievement considering the amount of mainstream appeal they also had. In third, it's Junkyard by The Birthday Party from 1982. The Birthday Party were no strangers to twisted, surrealistic imagery, but on Junkyard, it's off the chart and is combined with a kind of gothic blues from hell. The brilliant cover by Ed Roth gives an indication of the insanity contained within the album's 10 tracks. Vocalist Nick Cave and guitarists Roland S. Howard and Mick Carvey were the chief songwriters, and in spite of the band being close to disintegration, they were well and truly on the same page at this point. Cave at times sings like a demented version of Captain Beefheart, and the nightmarish visions of the lyrics go hand in glove with the equally deranged musical adrenaline rush. Hamlet, Pow 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 and Big Jesus Trash Can are where things get strangest, but other tracks such as Dead Joe, 6-Inch Gold Blade, The Dim Locator and Cupid Doll are hard on their heels. Bass player Tracy Pugh didn't get to complete his part on the album owing to imprisonment for drink driving, which meant Barry Adamson from Magazine played on some parts of Junkyard. This was the Birthday Party's final studio album, but Adamson would later team up with Nick Cave and Mick Harvey when Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds were formed. Second is Head Over Heels by Cocteau Twins from 1983. From the cavernous opening drum machine beats of When Mama Was Moth to the fade out of the amazing final track, Musette and Drums, this is a mesmerising album. On their debut album, Garlands, the sound is muddy and claustrophobic, but in contrast, Head Over Heels is way bigger and more expansive. Elizabeth Fraser's vocals go to another level. On Garlands, she's relatively restrained, but here she really lets rip. Glass Candle Grenades, Sugar Hiccup, and 5-10-50-fold are 3 excellent examples of this. Musically, the album has much more variety than Garland's, and there's even some saxophone on 5-10-50-fold. Although Head Over Heels is a big leap forward for the Cocteau Twins, In Our Angelhood and My Love Paramore are closer to how they'd sounded before. In fact, In Our Angelhood has similarities to Feathers, Oars, Blades from their debut EP, Lullabies. I know that the use of drum machine throughout may be off-putting to some people. However, via the combination of Robin Guthrie's programming and smart production, it provides greater passion and feeling than many classic rock drummers. On the whole, I regard this as one of the most impressive albums of the 1980s. In first, it's The Sky's Gone Out by Bauhaus from 1982. In truth, any of the top 4 albums I've chosen could have come out of the top of this list. It just so happens that currently The Sky's Gone Out has that distinction. To fans of Bauhaus, this may come as a surprising choice, as In the Flat Field and Mask, their first 2 albums, are often rated higher than this one. Where The Sky's Gone Out works for me is that the track listing seems better organised. Therefore, I see it as less erratic than either of the previous albums. I don't think there's much doubt that the emphasis on each side of The Sky's Gone Out is quite different. However, the reworked version of the earlier single, Spirit, at the end of side one, acts as a good bridge between the two sides. In typical fashion for Bauhaus, it all starts with a bang, in this case a cover of Brian Eno's Third Uncle. It's much more powerful than the original and has a greater urgency. This is followed by Silent Hedges, In the Night and Swing the Heartache, which, as a sequence of 3 tracks, is probably my favourite by Bauhaus. Side 2 is a much more arty affair with the 3-part The Three Shadows, All We Ever Wanted Was Everything and Exquisite Corpse. On The Three Shadows and Exquisite Corpse, the band gets more experimental in style and structure, and that appeals to me. The original vinyl release also included the live album Press the Eject and Give Me the Tape, so not only an excellent package, it was a bargain as well. There we are then. It was quite a hard task to work this list out because there were lots of other albums very close, such as Song and Legend by Sex Game Children, The Seduction by the Dance Society, Dreamtime by The Cult, If I Die, I Die by Virgin Prunes, and Fetish by Ex-Mel Deutschland. Another couple of artists I didn't include for consideration were the Sisters of Mercy and the March Violets. They both released a lot of singles between 1980 and 1984, but no studio albums. Taking a broader look at Goth's impact, I think it's reasonable to say that it had an influence on later genres such as emo, shoegaze and dream pop. Maybe there's a case for saying Goth formalised the idea that almost any genre can have a distinctly darker side. Goth did it in respect of post-punk, and after that, black or doom metal, dark ambient and dark jazz all did the same for their respective genres. In the video description below, there's a link to a playlist containing a track from each of the albums I've spoken about. That leaves me with no more to say other than, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.